recording. Here we go. Okay. So, of course, we left off really having had most of this already built up, right? And we've started to see how we can actually break this model up into different parts, right? So it's good to kind of start to be able to see that element, right? So at this point, what we want to start to do, in many ways, is maybe start to thicken some of these separated parts, right? Not all of them have to necessarily be thickened, right? But we want to start to get some of those elements. Also, I really kind of do want to start to separate this off. So I really kind of, probably today and Thursday we'll be focusing on kind of refining some of the parts we already have, right? Get some windows on there. We're eventually pretty soon going to get to the rims, but probably not quite yet. So at this point, I want to kind of work on the body again. So, remember, just 4 for object mode, right? And then, of course, remember, you can click on the different objects. They're highlighted kind of with the orange outline. Remember, they are right here. In fact, you can kind of see there's the trunk. So, remember, if you go to your outliner here, because that's what this is called, this is your properties stuff, your properties windows. This is your outliner window. Remember, you could double left click, right, on an object, right? Remember, double left click is for selecting an edge loop when you're in edge mode. But in this case, when you're in the outliner, double clicking on an object there allows you to rename it. So we can call this, car trunk. There we go. All right, so I'm going to click back on this object. Remember, you can select them here, of course, right? So, car body is that one. You can always select them here. But remember, if you're in 4 for object mode, you can select them here as well in the viewport, which is often easier, right? I like the outliner more just to control the visibility for stuff, right? And you'll notice, much like Moto, you can actually just drag on these eyeballs to kind of turn them off, which is kind of cool, and turn them back on. So it's a pretty quick, fast, easy way to do that. So very similar to Maya's outliner, but in many ways actually a little bit more like Moto and stuff like that. So if you guys ever use Moto or Maya, you'll find a lot is in common, right, between these. A lot of things that Maya and Moto share in common. A lot of things that Blender now in its current 2.8 state, particularly when you have industry compatible on it, shares with both Maya and Moto. In fact, Moto's workspace setup is more like this up here, which I prefer, actually. It's Moto was my favorite until I really sat down with the new Blender and kind of like, yeah, this is pretty great too, and it's free. Right? So if you're faced with 2 awesome pieces of software, one's free, you kind of go with the free one, right? But yeah, so yeah. What I want to do is I want to separate this kind of roof off here, right? So in this case, we'll go to 2 for edge mode, right? And I'm just going to turn my tweak tool back on, right? In this case, remember, I have my mouse button set to it, but it is here, and you can just toggle through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this edge, and then I'm going to shift left click on this edge, right? And remember, what you could do is you could then right click, and you'll see that there is edge split. And this will automatically kind of unweld those at those corners, right? Now at this point, I probably want to separate this as well. So I can go to 3 for faces, select a face, and then select linked, right? Remember, select menu, select linked. I've changed to spacebar because I think I use select link a good amount. So for me, spacebar is better than right bracket, right? Spacebar is actually, is utilized for, I think, animation, scrolling through animation here. I'm not an animator, so I just totally changed that and that's context sensitive based on the viewports too. Many of these quick keys you can actually assign again to different viewports and different tool sets, right? So I actually have my mouse buttons, my 4th and 5th mouse button actually assigned as my favorite sculpting tools in the sculpting menu. So Blender's actually really cool about that as well, is different workspaces with different tools, different menu tools. It's context sensitive to that. So you can actually utilize some of these quick keys, right? So if I was to go to layout, you'll see that spacebar actually scrolls through here instead of being that. But for me, I'm not much of an animator, and when I'm in modeling, I'd rather be select linked. All right. Remember, it's right bracket by default, but it is in here, right there. And it's just a great way to select the connected polygons. So even though this is all still one object, right? Since these are unwelded, since we split these edges apart and you can see them actually not touching anymore, that's how select linked works, right? It just selects the directly connected polygons. And of course, we could right click and we can see there's the separate selection, and that separates that into its own object now. And of course, I could double click on that in the outliner and just call it car roof. There we go. Call it car roof. There we go. And now that's kind of its own separate thing. Now in this case, I can go back into say like 3 for face mode. And I do want to kind of tighten these areas up, right? It's one of those things that we have already seen somewhat. But believe it or not, as you're building stuff up, you can tighten up shapes by putting extra edge loops in. And I think I'll actually do that in a minute once I've thickened this. But sometimes you get this roundness because of the subdivisional surface modifier we have, right? If you need to tighten shapes up, what you do is you put an edge loop, extra edge loops on the model, and you put them close to those corners to tighten up the shape. So I'll show you that in a minute. And we've kind of seen it here and there on some other projects as well. But in this case, I want to thicken this first. So I'm actually going to go to 3 for face mode and just select connected again. You can actually apply solidify as a modifier also, but because if you go to your modifiers here, you'll see that there is a solidify there, which does the same thing as I'm about to show you. But that does it to a whole object, right? So you will have it as a node, as a modifier, so you can always edit it, and that's cool. But if you're just trying to solidify some parts of your object or solidify them at different thicknesses, because you might have like several groups of polygons that don't touch as the same object, right? I don't necessarily, particularly if you're working on game stuff, you don't necessarily want to have 40 million separate objects, right? You might want to have a couple of parts as one object with one UV set. So you do have solidify as a modifier, but that does work for the whole object. If you just wanted to solidify specific faces, right, the face menu, right, because right, we're in our modeling layout. If you go to the face menu, you'll see that there is solidify faces there. So there is actually a solidify feature that can be used as a non-modifier, right? Remember, modifiers will do something to the whole object, and you do have them always available to edit later on, and that's what's cool about modifiers. But a lot of tools and a lot of things you actually want to be able to use just specifically on polygons, not whole objects, and you don't necessarily need to have that history there or those modifiers there to be able to modify, right? So there is a solidify faces scene here. We've seen that before, right? Remember when we kind of did some of our stuff on our room, but also our armor for our crab, right? Our crab creature we made for our first project this year. We kind of made some armor by drawing it on the surface, and then we thickened it, right? So solidify faces is a way to thicken an object, right? So I'm going to go to faces, solidify faces. And you'll notice that, of course, it brings up the options box down here, right? So you kind of click on it here, you'll see it's there. Technically, you can click on this to open this up and kind of get some of those options, right? So believe it or not, you can kind of get some of those things there if you want to also, but for me, I'm fine with that being closed. This is your thickness, right? So if I just left-click drag in this view here, you see how I can kind of thicken it a bit? There we go. You can type in a number, and these can incrementally go up by units of 1, right? But if you left-click drag in the actual bar itself, it's a faster way to interactively adjust it. Now, the one thing you do have to be aware of when you use this tool is certain modeling tools like Inset, like Solidify, don't actually fully follow clipping, right? Clipping is awesome. We've seen for loop cuts, regular extrusions, it works great. Extrude long normals. But certain modeling functions, it doesn't handle well. The nice thing is that clipping's still on, so all we have to do is select these kind of interfaces, because that's what they are. Is they're kind of the faces kind of in here, right? So it's actually because there's that row of faces there. Now in this case, remember I'm using select shortest path, right? And I've got a quick key set for it, X. So that's really those polygons if there was no clipping on, right? So if I turned it off temporarily or whatever, you'd see these polygons here, right? In fact, if I turn off subdivisional surface, you can see it's really just that row of polygons. I'm not turning off the subdivisional surface, but I'm just turning off the on cage feature, which usually I love on, but sometimes if you want to see what the low res will look like, right? Boom, right? So you can see it's really just those faces that would normally not be there. So certain features like Solidify or Inset, you do have to come back in there and get rid of some of those extra faces it creates. So that's what I selected those. Delete, right? So we can bring up the faces option, delete those. And then I can go to 2 for edge mode, double left click to select that edge loop. And then I can hit W for move, and I can just do a free move in here. And you see how clipping adjusts itself and starts to reclip, So if you just kind of move it back and forth a little bit, you'll see it actually clips and clipping starts to work again, and then we're good to go, right? So the nice thing is once you've gotten rid of those and you just kind of pull that edge loop back into the center so clipping starts to work, you're good to go. So it's really minor that certain tools like solidify or inset don't actually kind of work with the clipping, but it's really easy to just spend an extra like 10 seconds, grab those polygons, delete them, and then just kind of select that center edge loop again, just kind of bring it back towards the center until clipping turns back on and welds them and stuff like that. So clipping is awesome in Blender, but you do have to be aware that a couple of tools might not work with it perfectly. But usually you're not using solidify that often over the centers, right? And things like that. So you'll run into it only rarely, and it's a really easy fix. Maybe in the future they'll make that all the tools work with clipping better, but certain tools don't. If you use the solidify modifier, it would. I have actually noticed the solidify modifier would actually work with clipping well. But in this case, I didn't really want to apply that modifier for it. And now you can see that there's actually thickness for the roof. So solidify, whether it's the modifier or in the faces menu, solidify faces, what it does is basically it extrudes those faces along the normal direction, but it keeps the originals, right? So that you have a truly thickened object, right? Where it's kind of got, polygons on this side, right? But also polygons on that side. So it's a true thicken tool. Very standard, right? We're learning all this stuff in Blender, but if you go to Maya, you go to Modo, you go to 3D Max, you're going to find all these tools. In fact, a couple of you guys in here took Maya with me last year, right? And you guys remember Thicken. It was hidden in the Extrude tool. So at the end of the day, this stuff all translates to whatever software, right? The great thing about Blender is we could turn industry compatible on, and it already does a lot of things with Maya quick keys or just like Maya. But then if it's got its own things. Like this Thicken tool is actually its own thing, so you could actually specifically do it to just some polygons, whereas Maya couldn't. In this case, you see how this is a little rounded here, though? That's where we go to Alt-C for loop cut, right? Alt-C for loop cut. And I'm just going to left-click drag that guy in there, and you see how it's tightening up that shape a lot? And then I could go over here, and I could left-click drag to kind of tighten that one up a lot. So pretty easy to tighten up some of these shapes. We can even put an edge loop in around here to kind of make this a little square. So as you're working, if you want to make stuff a little bit boxier, a little squarer, put edge loops in close to corners, and that can start to tighten the shape up a lot for you, right? So we could always add a few extra edge loops in here just to tighten up the shapes and forms a little bit for us. And then if need be, we could just do, a little bit of shape tweakage just to get it to be a little bit closer to where we want it to be. Bring these guys up a little bit. Maybe the full face. There we go. And we just make some of these minor little adjustments we might want just to kind of get those a little bit better to where we want them to be. So I'm just using my tweak tool to kind of quickly tweak a few edges or vertices or faces. Remember, with your tweak tool on, you can easily switch between 1, 2, 3. You can even hold down Shift and turn them all on at the same time and kind of get a super mode where you can grab a vertex or an edge or a face. That works pretty well, but I've actually found that because you can switch to those with great quick keys and tweak tool stays on, that I've actually just found it easier just to leave it off. Even though technically you can have a version of a multi-select in here by just shift-clicking to turn them all on. But now you can see that this shape is just a bit sharper here. The forms are a little bit nicer for us. And it's got thickness. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to start to address today was, hey, we can start to thicken stuff. But remember, you can even kind of tighten up some of these shapes and forms just by putting some extra edge loops in. Now, you notice I'm not adding 40 of them, right? It's always better to keep your edge loops at a less, right? Like I can do a loop cut here to tighten that up a little bit. Maybe one through here to tighten that up a little bit. But you see I'm still trying to keep it pretty minimal, right? So one of the secrets to building efficient models is just putting the edge loops in when you need them. Now, of course, we are planning on applying this subdivisional modifier so that our low res will be look nice, right? Because really you would add a lot of these edge loops in anyways. So keep in mind that don't add a million, right? We're trying to utilize this subdivisional surface so that we don't have to add in tons, right? But sometimes you still need a few to tighten up some shapes. All right. So there we go. But you notice edge loops closer to other edge loops, particularly where there's a corner, and your shape actually tightens up a little bit, right? It looks a little bit more like a bevel instead of a really soft, curved shape. All right, so we can actually go and apply this to some other stuff, right? We can go to 4 for object mode, and I can go to the door, right? Of course, like I said, we can apply this as a solidify modifier, but I feel like I tend to prefer just doing it as a tool. So we go to 3 for face mode, select the face, select linked for the door, right? So select linked, right? And then, of course, we go to faces, solidify faces. And the nice thing is it'll actually apply the last solidify size, right? So if you like that size, it'll apply that. But if you want to make it a little thicker, you can. And now we have thickness for our door. Now, of course, we could rebuild some of the inside of this door to make it look like a proper inside of the door. You probably won't have that vent hole there, right? You can adjust shape. But the nice thing is it gives us a strong start for that door, right? Now, at this point, you can see that we do have a bit of softness here, right? So we could, of course, do Alt-C for loop cut, and we could put an edge loop in here. And you see as I put this edge loop in with loop cut here, and I move it towards the right, it tightens the shape up. See how that shape's becoming harder? Now, it's going to be a little tricky here because you see how this one doesn't go all the way through, right? So one of the things you could do, and this is where I'm going to take a bit of a break for us to talk about your some of your other tool functions, right? Click off. There we go. Remember, we have our add-ons, right? Now, I'm just going to go to Edit Preferences to show you this again, right? We've seen it in previous videos. Most of you guys have already got it set up, but I want to make sure to show it for particularly Dante and Paulina because, you know, their first turn with Blender. So Edit Preferences, right? And of course, we know the key mappings right here, and we could do industry compatible, which is what we've been using. But you'll notice there's a section called Add-ons, right? Add-ons. And there's a ton in here, right? You can kind of go through and look at their descriptions. You can open them up and see what it says here, right? I'm not going to turn all these on because we don't necessarily need every one of these right now. But one of the things we can do, like you have the add curve stuff, and there's some functionality it gives you there. I'm not going to worry about those right at the minute. But I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find some important ones. And they're actually already turned on for me. So UV layout we like to have on, right? Because that gives us some functions there. You can see I've got the modifier tools up, right? That's actually this stuff right here, right? So if you want to kind of get these extra little buttons right here, that's the modifier tools. Auto mirror, if you want to use that. Mesh tools and loop tools. In particular, that's what I was really looking for was the loop tools and the mesh tools. You can see them right there when we kind of open that up. That's because we turn these on. Now, these all come with Blender stock, right? You don't have to go download them. Remember, text tools, we did have to download, right? Eventually, we do more complicated retopo on our final troll kind of, or our more complicated quadruped. I'm going to show you guys some extra retopo tools. Speed retopo, it's free as well. But we don't need that quite yet. But remember, there actually are some nodes you can turn on. Some node options for working with your shading stuff if you want to. So there could be some cool stuff in here. I like having Magic UV on as well. And you see Text Tools is on as well because we downloaded that. And I'll kind of go over that stuff again. But in particular, we want to kind of make sure to have things like Edit Mesh Tools and Loop Tools on because that's going to give you some extra functions here. Now remember, to actually even see this in viewport, there is this little kind of V kind of pointing to the left, right? So if I click on that, that brings this up, right? You can see that there's items, so you can do some item control stuff. Tool, there's your tweak tool stuff. View, gives you some controls here. This actually gives you some cool camera view control as well. Edit's what we wanted, the Edit tab here. Because then I can open up loop tools and mesh tools, and you'll actually see that we have some cool things like our circle feature here, flatten, those could be both cool. If I go to face and utility tools as well, because you see how you can kind of open these up, you'll see in face tools is something called cut faces, right? Cut faces. And there's flip normals here, so if you want to flip polygons or reverse them, you have it. So these are some cool extra little modeling tools that give you some cool extra options. So in this case, in particular, the mesh tools, I wanted on that add-on, and I wanted face tools so I could do cut faces. So in this case, I'm going to make sure I'm in 3 face mode. I'm going to turn on my circle select, right? Remember, that's just left click drag and circle selects right there. And this will allow me to just left click drag over the faces I specifically want to select, right? Of course, shift will add. And you see this allows me to kind of wrap around a non-linear loop, right? If I just do a loop select, it would go around this way, right? Because it's based on the quads and the way the quads flow, and they flow that way. So this is when circle select is going to come in handy. And you'll notice what I can do when I cut faces is you see how it puts an edge loop in through what's selected, right? Now the cut faces have some options, right? Like you tell it to do quad or tri mode. You could tell it to do number of cuts. In this case, if I want to slide it over a little more, right click. There is edge slide. There is edge slide in Blender, right? And then you just left click drag and that slides like your loop cut without adding an edge loop. That. Now in this case, I don't want to leave that n-gon there. So what I can do is I could select just this edge and its equivalent on the back. And if you right click, right, remember you have to actually go to vertex mode. So you select those 2 edges because it's there. When I did that cut, it left an n-gon and a triangle here. One of the ways you could fix this up is by collapsing these, or you could do kind of a multi-cut through here. And I'm going to show you both here, and then that we've done for the lecture for today. So if you right-click in vertex mode, you'll notice there is merge vertices, and there's something called collapse, right? Because if I do it at center, it's going to try to merge them all to the same point. And there's times when that's great, and you want that. In this case, though, I want these 2 vertices and these 2 vertices, since they're on different parts of the mesh, to merge together separately. So that's where merge vertices collapse is great, because you see how it just welded those 2 together and those 2 together. And you see how it basically keeps that flow for us. But we also kind of see this as maybe an opportunity if we wanted to, right? Now this kind of star kind of creates a weird shape, so I kind of think that's the better solution. But technically, remember we do have our knife tool, and we could click on that vertex and then click on this edge and then hit enter. And so it makes a little bit of extra geometry there for us to tweak. But it does kind of create that slightly weird 5-star that pulls the shape. So I feel like the collapse was the better option, right? So remember, I just selected that edge and that edge after the cut faces. And then we switched to vertex mode, 1 for vertex. And remember, it automatically converts, which is great. And then we right-click, because it's the vertex context menu, merge vertices. And we don't want at center, we want collapse, because that'll take each of those and kind of collapse them on their own, independent of the other side. There we go. And then, of course, if we want to, we could just go to 2 for edge mode, select that little edge loop. Remember, double left click. Right click for edge slide, slide that over a little bit more. There we go. And that just creates it a little bit cleaner. But now you see there's door thickness. We see that that door is looking sharper in terms of shape, right? So obviously, we couldn't get through all the thickening yet, and there's still some more stuff we want to do on these things. But we're starting to kind of see how our thicken tools through Solidify work, how we can add loop cuts in to sharpen the corners, right, to make them harder edged, right? And that was kind of a big thing. We saw collapse a little bit today. So those are some of the big cool things I just want to kind of remind you guys that we have.